Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is Discerning What is True. I am on YouTube. That is, you go to YouTube and you look under my site that is there, Discerning What is True. And then what you do is go to the live videos, which is basically the most, I guess, the newest ones I put out here in the last couple of months. And I'm also on Odyssey, and actually I'm on Facebook also. Today is the first day of February 2023, that is. So I'm going to be reading more of the Nikki Raapana's book here. Part one I actually have done last night and today earlier, and now I'm going to enter her part of the Definite Anti-Communitarian Manifesto. She is, as far as I know, she's by far the expert on this particular area of communitarianism, and very few people who are even fighting the New World Order, not New World Order, but the Agenda 21 deal, have no idea what she's talking about, you see. And she talks about the many issues here. So we're going to get into this right now, and I appreciate you being here. Again, you're welcome to share your inputs. Usually I will not know that until later in when I'm getting ready to sign off, so I may answer you then. So I'm usually reading what I have here on my computer. So this is the Definite Anti-Communitarian Manifesto by Nikki Raapana and Nordia Friedrich. Here's a quote. I want to tell you something. John Maynard's Keys is actually a Fabian. I'm sure she knew that. This is from General Theory, and this is a quote. The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. And then she goes into a couple things here, she calls it abstract. Background, communitarianism is the theory. Hold on just a second here as I check it out here. So this is communitarianism is the theory that individual rights must be balanced against the rights of the community. Its many proponents insist that individual rights and liberties pose a real threat to the health and safety of the community at large. So communitarian law is the basis for hundreds of new global rules and regulations eliminating individual rights. Results. The progression of recent history clearly shows a dedicated effort to lead the world into unknowingly accepting communitarian solutions. To understand how philosophical communitarianism advanced itself, the authors trace it back to the original source. Using the works of the leading communitarian theorists, they follow the path from Seattle neighborhood plan all the way to the International Court at The Hague. Conclusion. The foundation for communitarian theory is the Hegelian dialectic. Part 1. A tutorial on the Hegelian dialectic is fully substantiated by Jesuit priests, renowned Marxists, and even Pope John Paul. Theoretically, analysis, i.e., that is, communitarianism did not evolve naturally. B, it was never a movement that arose out of U.S. society. 3, therefore, communitarianism has no natural home in the United States. It is further substantiated with verified social references that overwhelmingly support it. Part 2 outlines historical events leading to this synthesis. The changing duality of the legal system clearly indicates communitarianism is a criminal enterprise whose aim is to destroy all legal institutions established under natural or state constitutions. Both parts establish the aims and shared goals of the lesser arms involved in the global communitarian insurrection, showing direct ties to the United Nations Local Agenda 21, the War on Terror, the European Union integration under communitarian law, the emerging North American Free Trade Zone, regionalization, community buildings, community-oriented policing services, etc. Okay? So she's going to go now in this particular part 1. What is the Hegelian dialectic? Originally titled, What the Fuck is the Hegelian Dialectic? And published online as a worldwide document at nord.twu.net /ACL/dialectic.html. Copyright 2002 to 2012. Nikki Raapana and Nordic Friedrich. Introduction. Why study Hegel? And who is Hegel? The state has supreme right against the individual, whose supreme duty is to be a member of the state. The right of the world spirit is above all special privileges. This is a quote from Hegel. Author, historian William Scheider, quoting G.W.F. Hegel in The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, born in 1770 to 1831, was a 19th century German philosopher and theologian who wrote The Science of Logic in 1812. For many historians, Hegel is perhaps the greatest of the German idealist philosophers. In 1847, the London Communist League, that is Marx and Engels, used Hegel's theory of the dialectic to back up their economic theory of communism. Now in the 21st century, Hegel and Marx's thinking affects our entire social and political structure. The Hegelian dialectic is the framework for guiding our thoughts, our actions into conflicts that lead us to predetermined solutions. If we do not understand how the Hegelian dialectic shapes our perception of the world, then we do not know how we are helping to implement the vision for the future. Let me just say one thing. This work here is paramount for you to understand what the hell is going on in the last 20 years, if not longer, folks. Okay, remember George Bush, says, it's a big idea. You remember that? He may not have been referring to this, but this is a big idea. And it's been used before, that is with communism. Hegelian dialectic is the tool which manipulates us into a frenzy, circular pattern of thought and action. Every time we fight for or defend against an ideology, we are playing a necessary role in Marx and Engels' grand design to advance humanity into a dictatorship of the proletariat. The synthetic Hegelian solution to all these conflicts can't be introduced unless we all take a side that will advance the agenda. The Marxist global agenda is moving along at a breakneck speed. The only way to stop land grabs, privacy invasions, expanded domestic police powers, insane wars against inanimate objects, and covert actions and outright assaults on individual liberty is to step aside the dialectic. Only then can we be released from the limitations of controlled and guided thought. When we understand what motivated Hegel, we can see his influence on all of our destinies. Then we become real players in the very real game that has been going on for at least 224 years. Hegelian conflicts steer every political arena on the planet, from the United Nations to the major American political parties, all the way down to local school boards and community councils. Dialogues and consensus building are primary tools of the dialectic, and terror and intimidation are also accepted formats for attaining that goal. Calverton Private School has posed a great vision chart explaining the dialectic. The ultimate, I'll show that to you here, maybe, or maybe you take a picture of it on the camera. The ultimate third way agenda is world government, folks. Once we get what we once we get what's really going on, we can cut the strings and move our lives in original directions, outside the confines of the dialectic madness, focusing on Hegel's ultimate agenda and avoiding getting caught up in impenetrable theories of social evolution. Gives us the opportunity to think and act our way towards freedom, justice, and genuine liberty for all. Today, the dialectic is active in every political issue that encourages taking sides. We can see it in environmentalists instigating conflicts against private property owners, in Democrats against Republicans, in Greens against Libertarians, in communists against socialists, in neocons against traditional conservatives, in community activists against individuals, in pro-choice versus pro-life, in Christian against Muslims, in isolationists versus interventionists, in peace activists against war hawks. No matter what the issue, the invisible dialectic aims to control both the conflict and the resolution of differences and leads everyone involved into a new cycle of conflicts. We definitely are not in Kansas anymore, you see. Number one, the origin of deductive and inductive reasoning. Logic was introduced to the world by the Greeks in the 4th century BC. Aristotle gave us the foundation for the most often used methods for logical and critical thinking. Deduction is a process that moves from the general to the specific. Induction moves from the specific to the general. Methods for reasoning are mathematical formulas that base their conclusions on ideas, experience, or information from outside sources. Kimmerlin, this is 2002, explains. This is K-E-M-E-R-L-I-N-G. Explains, in a deductive argument, the truth of the premise is supposed to guarantee the truth of the conclusion. In an inductive argument, the truth of the premises merely makes it probable that the conclusion is true. And I want to show you this form afterwards. Here's a chart from Whitworth College explaining inductive and deductive reasoning. At Lander University, Philosophical 103, Introduction to Logic, the Nature of Logic. The History of Western Philosophy. Posted at Marxist.org. Deductive reasoning is often defined as pre-enlightenment thinking because it is based on the commonly held belief that God created the universe. Inductive reasoning is considered to be the scientific, non-religious form that gains authority after the Enlightenment. Aristotle wasn't all that concerned about which method was preferred or best used, but a well-founded scientific argument that uses deductive or inductive reasoning establishes strong premises that relate directly to the conclusion. Man's capacity to reason beyond the knowable can be seen in modern universal principles, such as with the theory that said the earth was round and not flat. For centuries, the established belief was that the earth was at the center of the universe, and the naked eye tells us the earth is flat and the sun goes up and down. The deductive principle is that God created the universe and man was created in God's image, which places the earth at the center of God's universe. This belief also designates the monarchy and established church as the divinely appointed rulers of man. Unseeable, unprovable conclusions, such as the earth is round and the earth circles the sun, were formed under an inductive form of reasoning based on man's ability to think beyond what can be seen, or is commonly believed. The original method for reasoning based its premises on commonly held truths and used mathematical principles to advance mankind into realms of greater knowledge and truth. Deductive reasoning dominated, that is, up until the 16th and 17th centuries, when rational thinking expanded to conclude both deductive and inductive reasoning. This paved the way to applying inductive scientific reasoning to political and economic systems. Many amazing scientific achievements were made by the greatest rational thinkers in the world who were able to apply both. Rational thinking was the foundation behind the documents used by the Americans to attain their freedom. The scientific-based political ideas of man's natural right to property was based on the writings of John Locke, who is remembered as the intellectual father of the United States. Locke used both deductive and inductive reasoning, as did the Americans who inherited his ideas. Locke subscribed to the three levels of law. At the top was God's law. In the middle was natural law. On the bottom was civil law. He believed that each type of law must correspond up to the next level. Men believed that while God's law was unknowable, it was possible to understand God's law through an understanding of nature, and that civil law was bound by the rules of natural law. The realization of U.S. laws and citizens' unalienable rights to individual freedom were attained via both the belief in a creator and purely scientific and rational thinking. The most common use formula for reasoning is called modus ponus, P-O-N-E-N, ponus. If A and B both exist, it's probably that C exists if it is a combination of A and B. For example, 1 plus 1 equals 2. Or if I live in a country where everyone is free under God's law, and you live in my country, then we are both free under God's law. Webster's definition of the dialectic. Date, 14th century. Logic. 2. A. Discussion and reasoning by dialogue as a method of intellectual investigation, specifically the Socratic techniques of exposing false belief and eliciting truth. B. The Platonic investigation of the eternal idea. 3. The logic of fallacy. 4. The Hegelian process of change in which a concept or its realization passes over into and is preserved and fulfilled by its opposite. Also, critical investigation of this process. Continue. B. 1. Usually plural but singular or plural in construction, development through the stages of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis in accordance with the laws of dialectic materialism. 2. The investigation of this process. 3. The theoretical application of this process, especially in the social sciences. 5. Usually plural but singular or plural in construction. A. This is always under the 5A. So yours is A under 5. Any systematic reasoning, exposition, or argument that justice opposes or contradictory ideas and usually seeks to resolve their conflict. B. An intellectual exchange of ideas. Number 6. The dialectic tension or opposition between two interacting forces or elements. Main entry. Dialectic materialism. Date 1927. The Marxist theory that maintained the material basis of a reality constantly changing in a dialectic process and the priority of matter over mind. So how did the Hegelian dialectic change the formula for deductive reasoning? The original method of deductive logic based its premises on the pretense of agree upon truths which led to an otherwise unknowable conclusion. Hegel's altered deductive reasoning from a simple 1 plus 1 equals 2 formula to a series of progressive triads where two opposite premises combine into a synthesis. And then each synthesis became the premise in the next triad. And on and on and on it goes. Where it ends, nobody knows. Okay? It's just it goes on. So I'm going to give you a little example. I'm just going to guess it so to kind of break it down. You can you can 1 plus 1 equals 2 form to a series of progressive triads where two opposite premises combine into a synthesis. So what you have is you have the vanilla ice cream, you have the chocolate ice cream. And when you bring about what they call the synthesis, bringing them together, then it creates another idea. From those two ideas, it becomes one. You see, and thus each instance becomes the premise in the next triad. So it's led on and on and on. It just continues on. Hegel established that history follows a logic progression through the dialectic process of constant conflict between extremely different ideas that keep blending together over and over, forming new ideas that keep merging and blending again and again until mankind realizes perfection in philosophy. Most importantly, that is to us, is that Hegel's version puts all of the emphasis on the collective expression of what is best for the people. So he had a bias. Okay. So the collective is what we would call the view that the many or a group of people are best than actually for the people than the individual. So he came in with a bias, if you want to call it that. So he puts all the emphasis on a collective expression of what is best for the people rather than what is best for the individual capacity to discover it for himself or herself. This is based upon Kemmerlin's K-E-M-E-R-L-I-G 2002 book. Hegel took logic to the next logical level in what many consider to be a higher intellectual level. claiming a ideology conflicting with its B, opposite ideology, equal C, a new and sometimes better philosophy. So what is, again, I'm saying is, you have one ideology and you blend another ideology and you opposite, you see, and they become something different. They become what they call synthesis. And then it continues on and on. So again, it's the same thing I was talking about with chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream, that it actually creates a different color. And then from there, another thing starts over again, you see. But his whole premise here is, this is where Hegel, we would say that she has discovered this, puts all the emphasis on the collective, expression of what is best for the people rather than on each individual capacity to discover it for himself or herself. So do you see that? Do you begin to see this? Because this is an error on his part. He is looking at the collective, and what America is founded on is on the individual. It's not based on the collective. The collective idea is based upon communism, if you want to consider that, because that's what it's all about. It's not about the individual freedom. It's actually all about the collective. The group gets the priorities. Partly, we could say also, when we talk about democracy and republic form of government is far more leading towards the individuality of people and their freedoms. Democracy in its reality is simply this. And it's based upon what I was taught when I was in political science. It's simply when someone votes, this is simply 50 plus 1, meaning 51 over the 100. So that 51 can now dominate that 49 out of 100. That's just how easy way for explaining that, you see. And so when the elections take place, and so the democracy, it says that once we have the upper hand, we can dominate you, even though it's only one vote. Same way you could say in the Senate at 51 to 49, it's dominant. Or you can come to the point simply is that there's always a way of breaking the tie. If there's 100 senators, 50 plus 50 is even, and then the Senate leader be casting that one vote, like one way or the other. Anyway, I hope you understand that. Hegel took logic to the next logical level, and what many consider to be higher. Okay, we already did that. Okay, so the dialectic pits A against B in a constant conflict and resolution. So continue with thinking about this, okay, which eventually creates an outcome that may or may not have any resemblance to the original A and B. According to modern social scientists, C does not have to be a reasonable conclusion, since Hegel's dialectic takes pure reason out of the reasoning. You see, if you don't get it, that means you got it, because anything arrived at using Hegel's logic doesn't have to Hegel's logic doesn't have to make any sense. I'm sorry, she wrote down here, got many, so it's make any sense. A quote from Bertrand Russell on the end of rational thinking. The dialectic method of reasoning is based on the premise of constant conflicts of oppositions or opposites of what we call ongoing tension between two or more commonly acknowledged truths. Good versus evil is the most common understood dialectic. In Hegel's version, it is through our understanding of what is evil that we are able to understand what is even better than good. Hegel's dialectic was an inward discovery of being versus nothing. This method changed the format for deductive reasoning into one which truth is attained by pitting truth against falsehood, which leads to a false truth. I'll say that again. Hegel's dialectic was an inward discovery of being versus nothing. This method changed the format for the deductive reasoning into one in which truth is attained by pitting truth against a falsehood, which leads to a false truth, folks. Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx expanded on the Hegelian dialectic to suit their own purposes. See the criteria of Hegel's philosophy in general by Karl Marx in 1844. Marx and Hegel's logic, and by Hiroshi Ushido, that's 1988. That last name is spelled Ouchida. Hegel's dialectic idealism was founded on the premise that the abstract thought process comes before the actualization of the idea. To Hegel, the idea came first. Marx and Engels said the opposite and wrote that human events precede the ideas about the events. They used the dialectic to explain the necessary conflicts that will lead mankind into social perfection. You see. State control of the production of goods and equal distribution of all wealth was to be the final crowning achievement of mankind. That is, the communist theory of human progress proves life in ongoing conflict between people at various levels of material wealth, and Marx thought of himself as a scientist who had discovered the key to human history. Dialectic materialism changed the Hegelian formula in several critical ways. First, they excluded all from the formula altogether. Then they pitted a lie against a lie, claiming the result was a perfect synthesis. Yeah. The Marxist theory of inedible world evolution into totalitarian communism was attained via the Hegelian dialectic. The modern theory of global spiritual evolution into global Communitarian collectives as well. The transfer from Marx's is the Hegelian dialectic applied materially as opposed to the ideally. The Soviet Union was based on the Hegelian dialectic, as is all Marx's writings. The Soviets didn't give up Hegelian's reasoning when they stopped being a communist country. They simply modernized their language. I'll say that again. The Soviets didn't give up Hegelian reasoning when they stopped being a communist country. They simply modernized their language. Hegel's resources from Andy Blunden, B-L-U-N-D-E-N, Blunden, I should say. Mr. Blunden is an Australian communist who studied Hegel's contribution to totalitarian dictatorships of the people. I mean, you got to see this whole thing is, it doesn't make sense in some ways, and it doesn't, because what it does leads to is what they're saying is dictatorship over all the people. American author Steve Montgomery explores Moscow's adept use of the Hegelian dialectic in Glasnost Perestroika, a modern Potemkin village, P-O-T-E-M-K-I-N, for a lengthy analysis of Hegel dialectic reasoning. The University of Idaho has an online version of studies in the Hegelian dialectic by John Ellis Mataggart. It's T-A-G-G-A-R-T, 1896 in Chicago. In chapter 4, the final result of the dialectic. The author explains the confusion inherited to Hegel's philosophy. Hegel taught that the secrets of the universe open themselves to us, but only on conditions of deep and systematic thought, and the importance of philosophy was undiminished, either by skepticism or by appeals to the healthy institute of the plain man. But there is some difference between taking philosophy as the supreme and completely adequate means and admitting it to be the supreme end. There is some difference between holding that philosophy is the knowledge of the highest form of reality and holding that is itself the highest form of reality. It seems to me that Hegel had been untrue to the tendencies of his own system and seeking the ultimate reality of spirit and philosophy alone, and that on his own premises he ought to have looked for a more comprehensive explanation. 4. Why is it almost impossible for a layman to understand Hegelian dialectic? Hegel's theory that philosophy is the ultimate achievement of the human spirit is extremely difficult reading. For a well-educated person, that is. It's almost like reading and it rings the healthy instincts of the plain man. Detective Philip Ward's, W-R-T-S, 2001 article, Communism, Oriental Policing, is a nice explanation of the influence that dialectic materialism has had on America. Henry D. Aiken, a professor of philosophy at Harvard, explained the Hegelian theory of no reason in an introduction to the age of ideology, beginning with Kant, K-A-N-T. The very conception of the philosophical enterprise that has prevailed since the time of Aristotle underwent a profound sea change, with the consequences that the meaning of each such base terms of traditional philosophical vocabulary as metaphysics and logic were altered beyond recognition. Much of the obscurity that prevails in the 19th century philosophical writings is directly relating to this fact. Considering the power is wheels, W-I-E-L-D-S, and how many people have embraced this ideology. It's amazing how very few people in the world will tell you they understand Hegelian dialectic. That's because it was never written to be understood. Even Hegel's biographers called his writings impenetrable, which means incapable of being penetrated or pierces, inaccessible to knowledge, reasoning, or sympathy, or incapable of being comprehended, based upon Webster. At one point, Karl Marx planned to simplify Hegel, the common man, but we have not been able to find the explanation if it exists. We think there's a very simply explanation for why the Hegelian dialectic is not simple and why it can never be simplified. Why the American 18th century, I'm sorry, not why. While the American 18th century political system ranks among the top modern scientific achievements, the 19th century educated imperialist writers pursue the highest achievements in irrational thinking about thinking. Hegel is at the top of our list of the world's most irrational thinkers. How is it possible to consider a Hegelian argument if the ideas, the interpretations of experience, and the sources are all wrong? Can a conclusion based on all these wrong premises be sound? The answer is no. Two false premises do not make a sound conclusion, even if the argument follows the formula. 3, 4, and 5 or 6 false premises do not all combine to make a conclusive sound, folks. You must have at least one sound premise to reach a sound conclusion. Logical mathematical formulas are only the basis for deductive reasoning. Equally important is knowledge, semantics, or considering the meaning of the words used in an argument. Just because the argument fits the formula, it does not necessarily make the conclusion sound. Hegel knew this when he designed his dialectic. He was an imperialist, con artist, who established the principles of dialectic. No reason. That is, his dialectic had allowed globalists to lead the world by his nose into a superstition's unreasonable, racist age of global dominance. I'll say that again. His dialectic had allowed globalists to lead the world by his nose into a superstitious, unreasonable, racist age of global dominance. They bought into it, which is what they wanted. The national governments are supposed to protect the common man from imperial controls over the private property, trade, and production. They ensure their work is against imperial slavery by protecting markets. But if you use Hegel's twisted logic, the only way to protect people from slavery is to become a slave trader, just for a while. Like Hegel and Marx, the best street con knows his spiel has to be based in truth to be successful. Good cons weave their lies on logic. This method is why cons are so successful. Number 5. The communitarian purpose for Hegelian dialectic. Hegel was an idealist who believed that the higher state of mankind can only be attained through constant ideological conflict and resolution. The rules of the dialectic means mankind can only reach its highest spiritual consciousness through endless self-perpetuating struggle between ideas and the eventual synthesis of all opposites. Hegel believed that all conflict takes man to the next spiritual level. But in the final analysis, this ideology simply justifies conflict and endless war. That's what he produced, folks. That's what he produced. Because he believed in what we call a struggle with these ideas, bouncing against each other, that somehow the good would come out of those two bad ideas. Okay. It's also the reasoning behind using military power to export a illogical version of freedom and false democratic ideas. Correct. That's what the United States has been doing for the last 100 years. Their foreign policy. We're going over there to set them free, but we have to use war to do it. What the fuck is that all about, folks? Tell me. This doesn't make any sense. It's not logical at all. Why would you want to set people free, but you got to go over there and war and destroy? But that's what we've been doing. since Woodrow Wilson, actually before then, actually during the deal with what I call Battleship Maine in some ways. But really, yeah, Wilson is the one that really began to do this. This is all progress, you see. This is all progression in their minds. The reason we can call it the justification for modern conflicts and wars, because no one can prove Hegel's theory is true. It's unbelievable. No matter how many new words they make up to define it, or how many new theories they come up with to prove its validity, we can prove beyond a doubt that it is all false. And we can show the final equation in Hegel's dialectic is. That is, that is, your nation goes here. System of political economies, list 1841. B, state control, world communism. C, state control, global communitarianism. So you put your name, you put United States of America goes in here, system of political economics. This is 1841. State control equals world communism. And then and when you do that, it leads to state control, global communitarianism. You see. The Hegelian dialectic was created because the American colonials won their national independence from imperial domination. In the War of 1812, the United States of America defeated the Imperial British Navy. That same year, Hegel published his confusing theory, The Science of Logic, that is coincidence, not hardly. The Hegelian dialectic was used to justify expansionist colony policies and terrorist acts against Americans. It was an academia elitist plot to cloak British interference in national trade now that they've lost their naval piracy power over the world trade routes. The Americans won their second war for independence in 1812, a war that was fought for the same reason as the first, to stop British control of local manufacturing trade. Americans declared their right to produce and trade as a sovereign nation. They insisted they were free to trade without thuggish European merchants and banks getting into their business. After this embarrassing defeat, the imperialists needed a sneaky way to regain dominance over American trade. Hegel's theory created a justification for the conflict between greedy European merchants and the American system of political economy, which allowed American merchants to operate as independents and retain control of their markets. Americans had forgotten that theirs was an economic revolution. And I'll say this again. Americans have forgotten that theirs was an economic revolution. The American colonial revolution wasn't a revolution of ideas. It was a revolution against the European imperial mob, which controlled the production of goods and services in its colonies. And I write this, I'll say this in my thinking. If you don't have economic freedom, you don't have political freedom. It doesn't work. Unless you are free economically, you can never have political freedom. You can't. No way. The American idea of economic free from tariffs and constraints spread like lightning across the world. Colonies and peasant workers everywhere took action to regain control of their own markets and stop imperial gluttony. In 1924, colony after colony had declared their independence from imperial domination. Greece declared independence from the powerful Ottoman Empire and based their successful revolution on American principles for self-governance. The imperialists were also losing control to new national unions, which formed to protect local production from foreign imports. The government of the United States was formed simply to protect labor and markets. And that, again, I'll point this out to you, critical again, what Woodrow Wilson did was eliminate most of the tariffs to protect American industry. And then what he did, that was where your government was getting their income from, was from, if they came in our country, they would have to pay an import tax. That's where the money came from, a lot of it, folks. And then when they eliminated that, almost of it, guess who it was put on? Me and you. The taxes were now collected to us. Now we had to pay them, unlike the other way around. That's why I say that Woodrow Wilson is by far the worst president of this country, period. By far. Not even close, folks. even though Franklin Delano Roosevelt did enormous bad things. But that's because Wilson set the standard. And Mr. Wilson followed Mr. Colonel House and really didn't have I'll say he had a problem with his ego. He simply thought of these things as his ideas. Colonel House let him do that, but House was the one to come up with the ideas. And then he was brag and say, this is my idea, the 14 points, whatever you want to call it. That's how Woodrow Wilson got in trouble, folks. The governments of the United States were formerly simply to protect labor and markets. American economics was the foundation for the protected German manufacturing unions in the 1840s. Considering how many nations embraced this idea so quickly, it must have been a pretty easy sell to the healthy instincts of a plain man. So what did the imperialists do next? They created a theory of collective workers' rights and claimed that abolishing private property and controlling world markets was the best way to help laborers. That's all bullcrap, folks. Marxism was the foundation for the Fabian Society's agenda when they merged with the British Labour Party in 1904. And the entire labor movement has been convinced their principles are based in Marxism. Modern labor unions have no idea what they are factually based in, which is entirely in the protective individual merchants principle inherited in the national system of political economy. The U.S. constitutional framers had also agreed to require all public servants to abide by a fixed standard of law, whereas the British Constitution is continually evolving. You know, when you've got a continually evolving, you don't have a solid foundation, folks. It never works. We had the best, folks. We had it all, and we let it slip out of our hands because we become spoiled. Well, we wasn't taught our great keys about what we did. There was a time when Americans had the ability to call a duck a duck. The former colonies were fearless in their devotion to the rights of man by Thomas Paine, 1791. Some people maintain the founding principles of economic liberty to this very day, in spite of how much most of the world drowns in the brown matter that clouds the dialectic head games. While Darwin's theory of evolution is still being debated, there's absolutely no proof that societies are continually evolving, folks. They're not. So when the London Communist League, LCL, used the dialectic method of spiritual advancement via constant resolution of differences, they based their theory on communism on an unproved theory. Marx and Engels later changed their minds amazingly and redesigned communism around the anthropology theories of Lewis Henry Morgan, but that was also unprovable. When Amita, I always pronounce this rhyme wrong. I wish I could find a place where to get this guy because this is a major guy. He's a professor at George Washington. He's 90-some years old. I think he's 94 years old. When Amita, Amitai, he changed his name, by the way, and his last name is E.T. Zion, used Hegelian reasoning to base the communitarianism on a basis between rights and responsibility. He built the entire theory on nothing but disproven or unprovable scientific theories. That's where it comes from, folks. You see, this gives credence to our hypocrisy. Communitarianism did not evolve naturally. It was never a movement that arose out of U.S. society. Therefore, communitarianism has no natural home in the United States. It's not our idea, folks. It's not for us. Not the rest of the world neither. And this is the problem when you run into these people who are what I call push their ideas. They're what I call always up in the sky, but they never actually, it doesn't work. It's not a workable idea, except it puts people in slavery and destroys them. And that's what they're doing. How we interpret the history of dialectic argument. Aristotle gave the world his methods for deductive logic in the 4th century BC. American colonists used John Locke's philosophy of man's natural property rights to form a free country in 1776. British economist Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations in 1776 to distort and to redefine American economies. That's right. In 1791, a few years later, Immanuel Kant challenged reasonable logic principles used by Americans with his book, Critique of Pure Reason. Edward Burke backstabbed America and France. both when he wrote Reflections on the Revolution in France. Thomas Paine published a rebuttal to his ex-friend Burke called The Rights of Man. Paine reasoned arguments against the imperialists ripped further than his motivational pamphlet, Common Sense, did during the American Revolution. The Rights of Man went global with the French Revolution, and something had to be done to stop it. In what could be called the most brilliant act of desperation of all time, the imperialists used Kant and Hegel to redefine logic and exclude reason from logical formations. It's built on quicksand, folks. And we've been deceived, all of us, including me. In 1841, Frederick List, L-I-S-T, published the National System of Political Economy, and successfully disputed imperialist free trade ideology. This book is still in use worldwide, such as with the social movement Pan-Russian Eurasia. In 1844, Engels published Outlines of a Critique of Political Economy. So it's 3 years after List did this. And in 1845, Marx wrote a draft of an article on List's book, in which he repeatedly calls List a German Philistine. It's kind of a German Philistine? Okay. Let's call each other names. Accounts has nothing to do with that, folks. It's a, when you don't like the way things are, you just call people names. Accounts about the life and death of Frederick List are full of inconsistencies. According to some, he was the most outspoken opponent of free trade and was becoming a venerable source for ideas to protect local labor and markets. Yeah, I in the 90s, I argued with people and they couldn't figure it out, which I worked in the business and I understood that free trade is not free. It never will be, because it's always controlled by somebody else. It's a lie. It's a pure lie. And it's destroyed the West immensely. Destroyed the United States economic power, folks. Destroyed it all with what I call another traitor, Bill Clinton. And all the other Republicans that went along with this shit. I've lived through it. I saw it. I watched our business work with this stuff, and I saw how it destroyed not only our company, small company that is, it destroyed large corporations to eliminate competition. And that's what this last thing has been taking place in the last 3 years. This destruction of what we call mom and pop stores is all based upon that too. Wake up, folks. Look around you. We're not in Kansas anymore, folks, at all. Others claim he was ridiculed for his outlandish protectionist theories, lost hopes, and became despondent and wandering aimlessly around Europe. In 1846, List died mysteriously after or during a trip to London, where he was discussing English manufacturing free trade with regular folks and leaders of the Camden Club. Comden, C-O-M-D-E-N. There is a huge disparity in the record of his death, so that it is impossible to determine how, when, and where it actually happened. However, he died. List's body was barely cold before the London Communist League began preparing their 1847 draft of the Manifesto for World Peace and Economic Justice via a mass revolutionary movement against private property. You see, the whole communist movement is simply all about allowing the elites to control again. It's to put them back into power against private property. That's what it's about, folks. The German-British merchant Friedrich Engels revised Hegel's theory to suit his needs and then passed it on to Karl Marx, who rewrote it with proper revolutionary flair. This is based upon Chaitkin, C-H-A-I-T-K-I-N, 1985. The Communist Manifesto was published in 1848. In 1850, a French economist named Frederick Bastille wrote the law and logically disputed Marx's fallacies being used against France. If you can get that book, The Law, it's well worth it, because it shows that Marxism is a flaw. Amazing, the logic of Locke, Paine, List, and Bastille are relatively unknown to modern Americans. Of course, it's been pushed to the dustbin. Yet Karl Marx is a household name, already gaining substantial ground against the Americans. British Marxists was boasted when Charles Darwin published his theories of human evolution in 1859. Engels, according to modern-day scholars, seized upon Darwin's theory to substantiate communism. When Marx read The Origin of Species, he wrote to Engels that although it is developed in a crude English style, this is the book which contains the basis in natural history for our view. They turned against what they saw as a social as opposed to the biological implication of Darwinism when they realized that it contained no support for the shabology of class oppression. Since they were slippery customers rather than scientists, they were not likely to relinquish their views just because something did not fit. From Marxists and Darwinists by Anton, A-N-T-O-N, Pannekoek, P-A-N-N-E-K-O-E-K, 1912. In 1877, Lewis Henry Morgan published Ancient Society of Researches in Life, Lines of Human Progress from Savagery Through Barbarism to Civilization. Then the slippery Engels seized upon Morgan's work as the constant evolving basis for the total unsubstantiated theory of natural social evolution into utopian world communism. These guys were slippery, folks. And the problem is simply they had to support the well-to-do. They made sure their books got published. And that's been ever since then. But anyway, 1887, the first World Zionist Federation was formed to plan for the creation of a Zionist national state. In 1947, Israel was formed into Palestine. In 1958, the Fabian Zionist Amiota Erzandi immigrated to the United States from Israel. The former terrorists became a sociologist, joined the peace movement in the 60s, and created the Communitarian Network in the 90s. Etazani, the father of communitarianism, also created a new science of social economics with Mikhail Gorbachev and has been advising the White House to incorporate Hegelian solutions in domestic policy since 1979. He's considered a guru by mainstream media. It's not unusual for Hegelian players to change their modus operandi and can be seen in other writers like fellow Fabian H.G. Wells, who was an early supporter of ethical cleansing. As Wells' biography explains, Wells' political evolution was from an optimist who believed in casual eugenic slaughter to a pessimist who cultivated humane virtues. So this is Wells' biography explains Wells' political evolution was from an optimist who believed in casual eugenic slaughter to a pessimist who cultivated humane virtues. I didn't know that. In 1889, the British Fabian Society, the London School of Economics, created socialist clubs across America. This is all pointed out with Dr. John Coleman. He talks about this also, and immensely to destroy this country from within. And worked with Oxford, Harvard, Columbia, and Yale to infiltrate the Marxist more social evolved economic theories of Maynard Keynes, using the Hegelian dialectic to describe the conflict between Marxism and decidedly un-American capitalist theories of Adam Smith. The definite authors of individual liberty as the foundation for just political and economic practices, such as Alexander Hamilton, John Locke. I don't know if I agree with Alexander Hamilton here, so we'll have to look at that. But anyway, that's what she put down here. Alexander Hamilton, John Locke, Friedrich List, Thomas Paine, and Frederick Bastiat were somehow relieved of their former influence and position in the debate. By the time Etazani induced the academic world to the Hegelian communitarian senses, re-educated American students were prepared to accept any new Hegelian-based theory without ever hearing the real, valid arguments against global imperialism and free trade. And brainwash. Hegel's formula has been so successful that as 2003, all U.S. domestic and foreign policy is dominated by communitarian thinking. The whole country is living under new laws, and yet Americans affected by impenetrable Hegelian laws have never once heard the term even used. Some historians have depicted the United States as a society centered around Lockean values, those of rights and liberty. That is, actually, it was now widely agreed that the United States had from its inception both a strong communitarian. See, they're just changing history. They're rewriting it. Both a strong communitarian and individualistic strand. That's what he says. He says that. I read that last night. A synthesis of republic virtues and liberal values. From the emerging global normative synthesis by Anat Ameta Eta Zion, published in the Journal of Political Philosophy, 2004. Postgraduate certificate in spiritual development and facilitation from the University of Surrey, United Kingdom. Political communitarianism includes market communism and or socialist economic programs, free trade, appointed citizen councils, exportable freedom programs, faith-based funding, intervention programs, mental health testing, emergency preparing training, the Vatican, the Talmud, the Earth Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Human rights are not individual rights, folks. Okay? Make that clear. It's a downgrading. I'm sorry, but I got to say that. Earth summits, sustainable development, European royals, Communist Party leaders, elected socialists, friendly dictators, sociologists, fascists, mobsters, Fabians, international liberals, the Bank of England, the City of London, the billionaires, movie stars, secret society, think tanks, private foundation, rural neighborhood planning, humanitarians, philanthropists, alchemists, theosophical organizations like 1,000 Points of Light, environmental law firms like 1,000 Friends of Washington, the war on crime, the war on drugs, the war on obesity, the war on terror, Weed and Seed, Neighborhood Watch, Volunteer America, Citizen Corps, churches, civil groups, and more. The list goes on forever with a veritable alphabet soup of agencies and organizations. United Nations, PNAC, FEMA, G8, LA21, EU, WB, ICC, NATO, WTO, GATT, NAFTA, CAFTA, NSC, OAS, AID, AID, IMF, Fed, FED, IRS, SSI, UI, NEA, CFR, TR, ALPAT, AIPAC, NOW, ACLU, NLG, FBI, CIA, KGB, MI6, NSA, WH, SH, DOD, DOJ, NGOs, WCCs, NATS, DON, DON, SPO, COPS, COPS, IACP, USDOE, USDOA, US National Forest, US National Parks, HUD, CAO, EPA, DV, DUI, Compass, and on and on and on. These are all bureaucracies, folks, that control your life. These letters, these alphabetical soups of agencies and organizations. They're bureaucracies that destroy freedom. Number 7, the Anti-Communitarian League conclusion. The Hegelian dialectic presupposes the factual basis for the theory of social evolutionary principles, which coincidentally backed up by Marx. Marx's Darwin theory of the social evolution of the species does not adhere to the basis for all good scientific research, even though it has been used for a century to create a vast new scientific community, including eugenics and social economics. It appears to exist mainly to advance itself and all its sub-social scientific arms as the most moral human science. To us, this means the entire basis for the communitarian solution is based on false premises. There is no factual basis that social evolution of the species exists, based as its own mankind's supposed evolution towards a British version of utopia. The Marxist platform in 1847 was to abolish private property, whereas the American Revolution purpose was to protect private property rights. Get it? You don't have the right to live on the land and be free. You're not free, folks. You're just not. You never will be. Why will you be charged property tax? You know, here's the key. Why do people have to pay property tax? Why is anybody going to pay anything on this earth for anything? To allow the powerful to rule us and to suck us dry. People. Modern Marxists openly claim they will rebuild the world, and they educate activist change agents to openly support overthrowing the legitimate governments of the world. Since their inception, Marxist agent provocateurs can be linked to every anarchist assassination and student uprising that causes chaos to establish European civilization throughout the 18th and 19th century. Modern Americans have succumbed to the conspiracy theory labels and will only listen to what propaganda machines tell them. Now our people don't believe anything, but the Arab world hates our guts, our freedom. Most modern Americans will never know what went wrong with their great experiment in democracy. I would say great experiment in Republican form of government. The Marxist communitarian argument has not provided a shred of evidence to prove their utopian vision. They don't, folks. It's just a belief. It's just like a belief in a rapture. It's just like a belief that Jesus is going to come again. It's the same old crap, you see. It's just been modernized. And their synthesis does not match their own projected conclusion of world justice. Because their running record is simply as they destroy people, they kill people. Are you aware that almost 80 million Russians were killed? I assume there was even more in the Chinese communists, Mao Zedong. We are convinced their arguments substantiate our conclusion that the entire philosophical dialectic argument is nothing but a brilliant ruse. We used to call it a cheap parlor trick until a reader wrote us wondering how we could call it cheap when it had been so successful. And he was right. The dialectic argument for human rights, social equity, and world peace and justice are a perfect design diversion in the defeated British Empire, the Hegelian Fabian metaphysical theosophical monopoly game. It's the most successful con job in the history of modern world. For a well-presented Christian overview of the con, see American Babylon Part 5, The Triumph of the Merchants by Peter Goodgame. The communitarian synthesis is the final silent move in a well-designed, quiet implemented plot to remake the world into colonies again. To us, it doesn't matter if there is some form of ancient religion that propels the plotters, nor does it really matter if it turns out they're aliens, as some suggest. That's not the important part here. The bottom line is the Hegelian dialect that sets up the scene for state intervention, confiscation, and redistribution of wealth. The redistribution of wealth goes back to my days of political science, the haves and have-nots. You take from the haves and give to the have-nots, and you destroy society. And if you don't have any upward mobility of seeing hope in the future, which is what the poor people have always tried to do, to move upward, that's no longer true, folks. Very few, unless you play their game, it doesn't work anymore. Wherever you're born in, you're going to stay that way, you see. And so we're going to have to fight another war. Not another war. We have to fight a war of ideas here again to help the brainwashed to see this. The Hegelian dialectic cannot be a conspiracy theory because it is a well-documented. The concept of conspiracy theory is a cruel joke. We've all been duped by global elitists who plan to exercise complete totalitarian control over the people and property of every nation. Number 8, examples of power systematics in the dialectic. Adam Smith's laissez-faire capitalist emphasis selfishness is false. The communist and socialism emphasis controlling capitalist selfishness is false. Communitarian morality emphasizes balancing capitalist selfishness, false, because they're based on false ideas. 2, a government of the people, true. A government of the state, big time false, folks. Anything that has the state above you is false. You will never be free in that situation, folks. You never will be. It has to be the government of the people. So the basis is the government of the people. 2, true. Government of the state, false. And the government of community is also false. 3, American industrial freedom, 1775 to present. Power inherited in the people, true. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and state constitution. In constant conflict, resolutions with B. Marx theory of world communism, 1847 to present. Power inherited in the state is false. The ideology of Engels, Marx, enforced by European powers, international bankers, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, and Castro, etc. Nationally based, that is, violence involves, nationally based slash evolves into C. The Communitarian Third Way, 2002 to the present. Power inherited in the global community is false. The Jacobin civil society legal authority authorized by the United Nations, local Agenda 21 players, and the Earth Charter. Represented by the Communitarian Network, the International Socialist Party, the British Fabians, the New Democratic Leadership Council, the British Labour, the International Court of Justice, NATO, Jewish and Christian Zionists, feminism, neocons, the Christian right, the Chinese communists, the Russian KGB, the Mossad, the CIA, the MI6, the European Union, Rhodes Scholars, G8, WTO, AID, IMF, community policing, cultural anthropology, thousands of non-government organizations, NGOs, and government agencies, conservationists, Gaia, worshippers, think tanks, the radical middle, the terrorist environmental movement, the violent peace movement. How can you name a group? Here's, this is just really radical. The terrorist environmental movement, okay, and the violent peace movements, you see, 33-degree Freemasons, progressives, change agents, etc. 4. The United States of America, individual rights of the common born man, natural law. The U.S. is founded upon the concept of man's natural rights. Man's natural rights can only come from one creator, are recognized for all naturalized individual United States citizens. The U.S. created a new system of federal government, that is, one that works submissively for the free states. Yes, at one time it did. Under supreme laws, it rose from a free society. It was well established. It was established under one-of-a-kind original legal binding documents. B. Communism, the common good of the party, sacrificing individuals. That is unprovable theory. The Marxist theory of extreme central government control is the first step to teaching people to live collectively. And you know what group that actually has always lived collectively? The Jews. Let's just come out really out there and say it what it is, folks. That's why they've completely dominated in the last 4,000 to 6,000 years. That's why Babylon fell. That's why Egypt fell. That's why Greece fell. That's why Rome fell. It's always been a parasite to destroy from within, and it's been always the collective that's done this. That's not what she says here. I'm saying it because I see it. It's very clear. Communism trains people to be more moral citizens. Once a population is subdued by absolute power of local committees, you see, the theories say that totalitarian control can and will be modified to allow mankind to blossom into full utopian bliss. Well, they didn't do it in the Soviet Union, did they? They didn't do it in Cambodia. They didn't do it in China. They haven't done it anywhere, folks. Not in Cuba, anywhere. It never has worked because it's all bullshit. It was established under Frederick Engels and Karl Marx's publication of the Communist Manifesto in 1848, an unoriginal, non-lengthy binding document after social scientists earnestly engaged in dialectic capitalist collectivist debate for over 100 years in a worldwide theological struggle. It has finally been resolved into a new age political theory. Americans saw what happened to Senator McCarthy and the results of the Cox congressional investigation of communists. You see, they destroyed him. They destroyed Senator McCarthy. And eventually, as far as I know, he died. But I think he died something else, but I don't know for sure. The media ran all over him eventually because he began to make noises. And I have a book here I have not read by him, how they brought him down. Maybe one day I'll get a chance to read it. Americans who questioned communist programs and agencies were termed red baiters and completely discredited. U.S. laws against communist conspiracy remain on the books, but since 1953, few Americans have participated in the debate. In 1993, U.S. individual liberties and international communism were balanced by social scientists they established. C, the third way. Elitist social justice by sacrificing individual rights, unprovable theory. Human rights is the new preferred political correct term and is used by government bodies everywhere. But human rights is not the deal, folks. It's individual rights. Human rights is this nice, glossy stuff, but it's not real. It doesn't work. It never will work. I wish I could remember what human means. Get all upset here. But anyway, used by government bodies and commodores. It is the result of a communitarian balancing act between man's natural rights and the collective good. The modern communitarian philosophy was founded by Dr. Emilio Etzion, a Zionist, a Fabian, a scholar who emerged from Israel to the U.S. in 1958, active in world order projects since the early 60s. His rise to power in America is a lesson into itself. He cannot be trusted. He was a terrorist also. As advisors to President Carter, Reagan, Clinton, and George W., Etson's involvement included the new character education, all these catchy words, AmeriCorps, faith-based initiative, community government, community policing, limited individual privacy, limited, and total elimination of the rights to bear arms. His lectures on more moral dialogue are the basis for all new communitarian laws. 4 different impressions of the modern Hegelian dialectic theories. The scientific side. Hegelian dialectic has interpreted by Gavin Smith, S-C-H-M-I-T-T, to Hegel to understand what something is not helps to better understand what something is. And conversely, the more we know what something is, the more we know what it is not. The concept or object, which we call a realization of the concept, is affirmed by its opposite. Oftentimes, Hegel's method is explained as thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. This was, in fact, the way it was explained to me in my introductory classes, and the way it appears in many philosophical dictionaries. If we start with a certain idea or object, this idea or object is the thesis. Any idea or object we compare contrary to the thesis is the antithesis. The outcome is the synthesis. A better understanding of the thesis is occasionally a higher step in the world of ideas, as we will see in the moment when I discuss history. The American side, helping you connect the global to the local, understanding how the Hegelian dialectic is transforming the world to bring in the new world order. By the Women International Media Group, Incorporated. Researchers writer named Joan Beon, B-E-O-N, may she rest in peace, explains, in the last 4 years, while covering the United Nations, I have come face to face on a regular basis with communists, fascists, and socialists. I found a result of my own ignorance that I could not identify them and therefore not identify the true meaning of what was being put forth in all the documents I was reading. While I understood the goal of world government to be behind everything the United Nations was doing, I did not know the modus operandi they would use to concept people from a capitalist system where the individual is a master and molder of his own destiny, undergirded by personal property rights, reinforce his claim to that destiny to one of complete control where man did what the state directed, when the state directed, and in the process gave up his freedoms and private property so the state could better direct its use. I then found that the modus operandi being used for this transition was called the Hegelian dialectic, which is comprised of 3 parts: the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. Cold War Myths, that is a exercise in use of dialectics by Charlotte Thomas Iserby at newswithviews.com. The Israeli side. The Talmud is considered to be a dialectic. Rabbi Anton Steinsaltz has written a multi-volume work. I'll spell that to you. His last name is Steinsaltz, I should say. S-T-E-I-N, Saltz, S-A-L-T-Z, has written a multi-volume work. The Talmud, the Steinsaltz edition, Random House, which includes a reference guide in which he says, the ultimate purpose of the Talmud is to seek out truth. The Talmudic dialectic can be compared to an inquiry in pure science, particularly in the sphere of mathematics. The Catholic side. The Pope John Paul II endorses the New World Order and communitarianism. The Vatican calls St. Peter's second conversion and baptism I can't believe this, second conversion and baptism a communitarian event. Footnotes. Footnotes refer to links embedded in the original HTML document What is Hegelian Dialectic, published in December 2002. Most of these external links now go to outdated websites, unfortunately, and 404 web errors. See, they're just erasing whatever is out there now, you see. And there are tons of notes here. I'm going to go through the notes here. I'm not going to go tell you what they are. I'm just going to go through how many there are. She uses these notes to share. There were 80 of them. So I'm going to take a break here. I think this is maybe a good time to take a break. Well, actually, I'll just finish it up. It's just one page here. Okay. The Reflections on Academia Journal. The Anti-Communitarian Manifesto has not been edited or updated with new revelations since about 2008, when we published it as a spiral-bound booklet for the first time in hard copy. We would like to add copies, if you like. We'd like to add copies, but it is a document frozen in time and represents the beginning of my academic journey that has swept my family away for the past 13 years. We wrote the first draft of what is a Hegelian dialectic because we could not find a simple, short tutor to explain in layman's terms the Hegelian dialectic and the formula for continuous social political conflict. It was drafted in December 2002 and published in 2003 at our website. It immediately became the most popular page. And once we realized how many people around the world were searching for the term, we expanded the article to include deductive and inductive reasoning and create a poll called "What Prompted You to Search for the Hegelian Dialectic," which to date nearly 8,000 people have answered. This is a book that was done. This book is probably, I don't know what, I'm not saying anything what year. I'll just wait to the end here. In 2003, also, we wrote The Historical Evolution of Communitarian Thinking, a more dedicated approach to the subject, written to the American Sociological Association Standards for Citations. It also was the perfect complement to our Hegelian tutorial and became part 2 of the manifesto. Since then, our thesis has been reproduced in part and whole with permission and without, and referred to in hundreds of articles, academia papers, and books and websites. The Anti-Communitarian Manifesto has been introduced alongside Amita Etazan's books in a quality of life seminar at Vassar, VASSAR College, and our work was given extensive mention in the National Association of Scholars of Pedagogy on the Communitarian Resident Life Movement. So we're going to stop here. This is a long chant here. I'm going to take a break, and then we'll possibly come back to you. This is about 8 o'clock here on the East Coast. So it's a little over an hour I did this program here. We'll go back to this. I would recommend that if you see this, you need to pass it on to your friends. Time's short, folks. Many people have already given up. I already see that in people. They don't understand what's going on. They don't understand the value of freedom that they have. They're willing to actually ditch it. A lot of it's based upon fear. A lot of people are fearful. So I appreciate, again, like I said, you being here. This is it's by far the best work I've read on communitarianism by far. It's well worth it. You can actually look this up and going to archive.org and looking up the Anti-Communitarian Manifesto yourself before it is actually erased one day, because it will be erased, folks. Okay? And you download it. Okay? Unfortunately, she passed away last year. Nikki did. I was able to get a hold of the other lady, Nordica Friedrich. I don't know what happened. Nikki just passed away suddenly. No reason. She wasn't ill or anything like that nature. She just passed away. It's gone. And I assume her daughter has had a hard time dealing with that. In fact, I know that would be a hard thing to deal with for sure. And they were two pair. They worked together in understanding all this. I hope that Nordica can eventually get back on her own, whatever, to this point, to be able to do some of the things that her mother did. But, a sudden death of that nature takes a lot out of you. So we're going to continue in the next few minutes, a little while here, part 2, the historical evolution of communitarian thinking. I appreciate you being here. Again, thank you. And you have a good night. You take care.